Hi, this is Ronnie West.
And I'm Jeremy, or Dr. J,
This is Good Parents, Good Children.
because without you, your kids really would follow their friends off a bridge.
There are people that want your kids. They want your kids' heart, mind, body, and soul. They are, can I say, out to get them? They want them.
So you were telling me this, and I thought that it was just so alarmist, so extreme. Even kind of got this picture of like there's this big bad wolf outside the door saying he's gonna blow your house down, but inside, like, it's not little pigs, it's your kids. Why? Who are these people that want your kids? Why do they want your kids?
Right. So I think this does sound alarmist, but it's very, very true. And you actually remind me, this is kind of an old idea, because why was the wolf and the Three Little Piggies story ever created? It's a metaphor, allegory, or whatever. It was created because of this. It's saying, watch out for the big bad wolf. There are wolves which represent danger, and each of us need to watch out for the wolves. And then as parents, we're the primary ones watching out for the wolves on behalf of our kids and training our kids to watch out for them. Right? And that's the story.
And figuratively, to have your house built up enough, strong enough to withstand the wolf that comes by.
Exactly. That's the idea. So, I mean, in a sense, what we're going to be advocating for this is, yes, there are wolves, and yes, you need to be building the brick house and be watching out for the wolves. Now, in the story, the wolf has got the big teeth and is super scary, right? But what we're saying is that the wolves don't, they come out in sheep's clothing, right? They look innocuous often, at least to your kids. Maybe you would tell the difference, but this person doesn't present themselves to you. They present themselves to your kids. But okay, so to make this argument and try to bear this out, I think this is obviously true. I'm going to start off with an innocuous example. Pretty much everyone likes to evangelize some stuff. So basic things, right? It's nice to have your friends like the food you like. You can go to the same restaurants, right? You want people to like the things you like. If you like Indian food, you want to introduce your friends to Indian food who hasn't had Indian food. If you like a specific Indian food restaurant, you want to show it to your friends. It's nice to share your life with other people. Now, when you're sharing neutral things, that's fine. When you're sharing good things, that's great. But when you're sharing dangerous things, bad things, things that make you less virtuous, then that's the problem. And so you can think about drug use. How is it that there are 12, 13, 14, 15-year-olds smoking weed or worse, doing coke, meth, heroin, whatever? Well, their friends give it to them. That is the way it happens. It's not a stranger that comes up to them necessarily. It's a friend or acquaintance or a friend of a friend. And why does the friend of the friend want to get them doing something that we all know is a dangerous and terrible habit? Well, they want, if they're a drug dealer, then they want more people buying their product. If they're not, it doesn't have to come down to a desire for financial gain. It feels good, in a bad way, but it feels good to get more people doing the things you're doing, especially if it's morally questionable.
All right. I've got one then. So all the way from something that is good or virtuous, like, hey, come do this service project with me, right? We're all going to rake leaves or clean up somebody's house, to the neutral or at least innocuous, like if you're out having dinner with your friends and one person's eating dessert, they're probably trying to get the other people to eat dessert, because, if they don't, all right, well, hey, I'm one person eating dessert and I feel judged by you.
Right. I'm around all these athletic people that are trying to stay in shape. And we're on the opposite ends of this specific issue, since you're regimented and has amazing self-control and it's really disgusting. And then I'll be wanting to eat something fun. And then you'll be like, no, I would just like to have steak, no sauce.
So again, the innocuous thing, but the perception of judgment, if you're engaging in the momentary pleasure of a dessert, and then around you is the virtue of discipline, and then the perception of, okay, I'm being shamed.
It's a legitimization.
To something that's actually problematic or a vice. And here's my main example. Do you ever notice if you're out and some people are drinking and they only seem to be happy if everybody else is drinking around them? It's this perception that if I'm doing something and somebody else isn't doing it, then I'm kind of being told that it's not okay or that it's wrong.
Like there's a sense of being judged. Yeah.
Right. So there's this move to change, like what's my local norm, or what's my average, or this is not so bad. And so if everybody's having dessert, well, then people just eat dessert. That's normal. And if everybody's drinking, well, then, we just drink. That's normal. But if somebody's not doing it, then the wolves, if you will, are going to move to press that person to engage.
Right. And that's speaking to like the sort of temporary short-term motivation, right? Like in this room tonight, right now, I would like people to also be doing whatever it is I'm doing. And that thing may be innocuous, a little bit gray, or actually really a problem, but it does, it kind of doesn't matter necessarily. It's, in that room at that moment, you want more people doing your thing. So that expresses the motivation of how some of those sorts of things happen. But then it can go on a bigger scale where, you want people to think the way you do about politics. And that's more like long-term. Like I'd like them to vote more the way that I vote in the long run. It's nice if I can convince them of that. Or of religious conviction or moral conviction, or who the bad guys are. Right? Like maybe you want to convince people of like who the bad guys are in sort of the narrative scheme of life. And if you can get people to hold the same bad guys as your worldviews are coming more into sync, and that is attractive to you. Now that's fine if your worldviews are perpetuating virtue and competence, and they help people improve what's going on around them. But if it's disgusting and nasty and bad for the future and for the people around you, if it's vice and not virtue, if it's incompetence and not competence, then, we're running into problems.
All right. So I've got one then.
Yeah.
Well, and this is that historically there was a romantic moral, right? A societal and perpetuated idea of what the standard of romance, even style of living was. Right. And so typically you'd have a husband and a wife, and sex would happen inside the marriage relationship, and they'd have children. And that would be kind of your general functional unit, the nuclear family. And when we had sexual revolution in the 60s, which has continued in today, then it was, oh no, we're removing not just sexual morality, but even these ideas.
But the ideal is moved or destroyed.
Right. And so the idea, the ideology of morals is removed, but so is the ideal. And so part of it is this broadscape. All right, there is no morality, so anything goes. You can kind of do as you please, and this is the liberation. But instead, it's, oh no, wait, there is morality, because it's just not possible to live in a moral vacuum. That's anarchy. So all right, the last great moral then becomes consent, right? Which flips everything on its head, because if you follow those ideologies, well, then you wind up with everybody's being promiscuous as teens. Then there's not reason to marry. Then there's not reason to foster and nurture children in a nuclear setting.
Right. And so it also makes things, and this might speak to why people would want to convince others to live as they live and whatnot, is if a culture is sort of has an agreed upon narrative of life, like what's the ideal, right? So 100 years ago, and even more recently than that, then the ideal, and again, just because there's a primary ideal doesn't mean everybody who moves off from that ideal is outcast or judged, but there's There's or wrong.
Yeah.
The primary ideal could be wrong. A society could select an ideal that is actually not nearly as helpful for virtue and competence as it ought to be.
Mm-hmm.
But regardless, when there's one sort of main path, everybody has a sense of where they probably should go, and it makes life simpler. But if a society destroys those and then it's a blank slate, then it's very, very confusing. It's possible that this idea of trying to convince people, especially kids, since they are our future, that whole idea, trying to convince them of ways of looking at life, worldviews regarding politics, sexuality, religion, all these other topics, that it's trying to settle on a primary path because there's a desire for more clarity and less confusion and less chaos. And if you get back to a settled way of being, then that's going to feel better. I just thought of that, but I think that feels like that's probably accurate.
Yes. Well, this is that abhorrence of a vacuum.
Yeah.
Right. If you take the position there is no moral, you find it simply impossible to live like that. And so you got to establish, well, what's the new moral going to be? And
once they destroy the moral, they say there is no objective morality, then they have to force
fill
it in, right? So when people say that, it's like, well, wait a few minutes or a few years, they won't keep saying that. There's going to be a moral pressed on you later.
Yeah.
That it ends up being like a bait and switch, even if it wasn't planned.
Well, okay, so there's these straw men or obvious versions of this argument, which is like, hey, drug dealers would like to sell drugs to your kids or get them using drugs. Okay, that's probably true. And we might immediately say, okay, well, I don't want my kids doing drugs. Or you could say Hitler was a terrible person with an awful ideology. So nobody supports Nazism anymore, except for these very fringe groups. And sure, neo-Nazis could be after your kid too. But the National Socialist Party of Germany actually followed a version of socialism. And they for sure followed authoritarianism. And like totalitarianism isn't dead. And communism isn't dead. It's been failed multiple times over.
There's brands of it that have been destroyed. So those brands are avoided by people who, kind of like the ideas of totalitarianism. They won't talk about them using those brands.
That's right.
Fascism being one of them.
And so some people came up in the 70s or 80s, like we did, and into the 90s and 2000s. And now you have people who have come up in traditionally conservative strands who are saying things like, well, communism seems kind of good. Like everybody gets an opportunity and it seems fair. And there's things about it that seem interesting. And so we say there's wolves at the door. In fact, there's wolves in sheep's clothing. Because a lot of these ideas about the destruction of morality, about the destruction of ideas, are also about the destructions of institutions.
Right.
But in fact, the ideologies have taken over. This is most apparent in the university setting. If you were in college nearly 20 years ago, like we were, even then, it was problematic to go into a classroom and say, I believe in an objective moral, or to say, I support a libertarian political ideology, right?
But there's a creed that that is considered acceptable, that you're sort of supportive, you're supposed to support and proclaim.
And that's right. And especially if you bother to go to the university, because that means you think being smart's important. That means you think getting educated is important, but it points out that we have a ruling class that's intelligentsia. So what is the creed that we're all supposed to affirm now?
Well, before I answer that, you kind of alluded to this, so I want to bring up something I was thinking about. So it's like, what are the kinds of things that we need to be watching out for?
Okay.
Right. So political ideologies, especially extreme ones. I mean, I'm thinking communism. So you mentioned that, and you were connecting that with the university life and saying that, things, communism or ideas that are communist adjacent or fit into that are part of the university lifestyle. It's part of the education system there. Other things include greedy materialism. So, saying people that behave as if, or who actually overtly say the purpose of life is just collect things and pursue greed, right? Like that's not virtuous. That is not a good ideology. And those people, people definitely want your kids that way. Like all the commercials to think about, like the meaning of life is buying stuff, lots of toys for kids, things are the meaning of life. That's not accurate. And that is, they do want your kid.
Well, this is, I want to use your kid as a tool, and I want them to be a commodity. It's not, I think I have a good product that will help your child flourish.
Right. Because that's not being a wolf. The wolf, to the wolf, the sheep is not just a sheep, right? It's a meal.
It's a meal. Yeah.
It is an item for me to use, possess, enjoy, etc. Right. So yeah. So political ideologies, greedy materialism, religious extremism, irreligious zealotry, sexual ideology, and then hedonism, right? We're alluding to hedonism when we're talking about promiscuity, drug dealing, getting your kids to pursue pleasure without regard for consequences, virtue, the valuable pursuits in life. Like pleasure is great, but pleasure goes below virtue, and you don't pursue vice and then sacrifice virtue in hopes of getting pleasure. For one reason, it doesn't work in the long run. You don't get the most. I mean, if you're just looking at pleasure, I don't think you get the most pleasure out of it. But there's other reasons, like there's moral consequences for these things.
And these items are adjacent. Like it's more typical, especially since we're talking about children. All right, you're exposed to a pleasure in life, and one that can be overindulged in or abused, like like a drug, right? We start there, but it doesn't start with, as a child, I'm adopting the opposite of stoicism. It doesn't start with I'm no kidding adopting hedonism, which means I pursue pleasure at its own.
Well, and kids are automatically hedonists. Look at Halloween, right? It's like they want to eat all the candy. Or video games. They want to play all the video games all the time. And if they have tons of video games, then they might get bored and like jump from video game to video game, or with social media. Like this is one of the things parents need to do. One of the wolves at the door is a hedonistic lifestyle or hedonistic way of looking at things, which is attached to the greedy materialism. And, all of these things are related because they are not virtuous. They involve people treating your kids as items or things to be used. But kids are, they're very tempted to be hedonists out the gate, as are we all.
Well, wait a second.
Parents need to, I think part of the argument, and we'll get to this more about what parents need to do, they need to set limits on their kids so their kids aren't getting in the habit of indulging their instincts for pleasure just all the time.
Well, you said wolves are at the door for your child's heart, soul, mind, and body. And we didn't say, okay, wolves are at the door for everybody. Might be true.
That is true. Yes.
It might be true, but the child is the one who has the less developed superego. The child is the one who has the less developed frontal lobe. Right. When you're all limbic system, then you want to hit that reward center over and over. And that's why children love candy so much.
Right. So what is all limbic system? Like, just explain that real fast.
Fair enough. So as your brain's developing, you get more neurons up here in the thinky rational part. But when you're thinking on purpose, yes.
Right.
But when you're a child, you don't have as much there. You've got a lot of deep structures that are involved in hormone regulation, that are involved in impulse activation. So impulse control lives here. That comes later. But before you get impulse control, you just get reward, right? And so it's really only as we're getting an older child, a teen, a young adult, that long-term reasoning gets properly on board, and you get, oh, I'm beginning to see the value of positive habits, or what we would call virtue.
So kids are sort of acting out like a program that involves impulses and whatnot, and they don't have the limbic system. They don't have the ability to identify better programs or aspects of programs. I'm thinking of programs like a computer
That's
program, right? They don't have the ability to judge them properly, know how to change them, reason out why to change them or what to change them to. So that's part of the reason why they need parents who the parents should be the ones that are, you don't program your kids like a computer programmer programs a computer, but you train them in a way where you're shepherding the programs they have, and you teach them how to reprogram themselves over time, because as an adult, they'll be in charge of their own program. And they'll have the limbic system to do it, hopefully. Yeah.
So the frontal lobe.
Thank you. Yes. Sorry.
So because the parent's job is effectively be the brain, be the mind support for the child until the child is developed. So the parent is properly programming the child's brain. So as they're an older adult, teen, young adult, it's working, right? We don't want to get super neurological here, but it's for one thing, it's properly biological. For another thing, it's a good construct to talk about. We need to reinforce these connections. Because if you got a kid that hits drugs over and over and over, that hits dessert over and over and over, those connections are over reinforced. So you come along and say, hey, let's talk about discipline and self-sacrifice and stoicism. And it's like, what are you talking about?
Right. In our recent video on mentorship that we did this weekend, we were talking about how life is, you can compare it to like a multiple choice test, but the multiple choices that are available aren't chosen by the teacher directly. Which choices a person is aware of in any given moment has to do with their worldview, what their parents, their school, their mentors, their friends have introduced them to. There's a limited culture, and society has given them a limited number of options they're aware of. And they can only handle so many options. Like, they don't want to have all the options in the world. It's too daunting. So part of what you're talking about is that limited option set. It's a similar concept. And kids, which options seem realistic and viable will be part of it. So if you're pursuing pleasure impulsively without boundaries on, drugs, food, teenagers being promiscuous, whatever it is, that's having a major impact on which options seem viable or available to them. And you think about this is true for any addict, right? Alcoholics, drug addicts, not drinking is not an option. The hope when they go to detox and then to residential facilities and all of this stuff, they go through the rehabilitation process, is to make sobriety become a viable option and make using become less viable is one of the things that's happening.
Well, that's really well put. And so it's this idea of not simply making a negative case for vices, but actually making a positive case for virtue.
Right.
Which is a much longer term proposition. All right. So all right. Did you want to talk about where these wolves are located?
Right. So, the simple answer is kind of everywhere. And I think before we hit this, I think we want to hit, we've alluded to this, but a little bit more about why we're talking about kids. Right? On the one hand, this is our channel is about parenting. So obviously we're thinking about kids, but I think there's a reason why they want everybody, but why would they want kids? Right. And so there is the concept of kids are the future. We've also talked about how they're not a blank slate, but they're more of a blank slate than we are.
Well, yeah, kids are by definition underdeveloped. So you're talking about kind of a limited option choice. When you're dealing with a child, there's more future options on the table, right? If I, as an adult, surround myself with people who everybody uses weed, then there's a greater likelihood that I'm going to use weed. But if there's one drug user in my life, that's probably not having any impact on me. And furthermore, I can actually remove them from my life fairly easily.
Unless you have tricked yourself or somehow you've been tricked into thinking they are the ideal and then they could be the primary influence. But that's way less likely if there's one than if there's like mom, dad, uncle, all my friends, right?
Well, that's correct. But you're talking about these societal clusters, right? That are looking for children. If we grow a whole host of children that, for the most part, are conservative, liberally speaking, that are abiding by a historical sexual moral, and you put these people into a university setting, well, they're prepared to be like, wait a minute, like my professor's talking about like communist ideas that were defeated some 40, 50 years ago.
I've heard about this already.
Exactly. But when there's an actual reigning ideology in politics, which is, hey, we're just deciding how socialist we're going to be, which really is the national dialogue, well, then
like they're begging the question then. And so the kids need to be more prepared to handle that, because it's a more subtle and grosser way of influencing people. We're like, well, we already know the answer is this, so it's just a matter of degree now.
And we already know that smart people aren't libertarian.
Right. Smart people are definitely not Republican, libertarian, conservative, any of that. They are, some degree of socialist or communist or collectivist or whatever.
Well, that's right.
And okay, so I want to talk about that for a second. Okay. That keys into the question of like, where are the wolves?
Okay.
Right. Because we want to be able to figure out how to identify them. And the simple and alarmist answer is wherever your kids are. Because if kids are if they want everybody and they really want kids, then where will they be? Well, they'll be where your kids are. And then, so it's like, okay, they're at school. They are definitely at the universities. They're at your kid's first job. They're your kid's first, they're your kid's friends. And I mean, they're going to be in places that you think are safe to a lesser degree. If you homeschool, then to some degree, they'll be at the homeschool co-op or the homeschool kids. If you're taking your kid to summer camp or Bible camp or church, they're there to a degree. So, and this really is a good sequel to the mentorship thing, because the reason why people would want to be good mentors, there's a mirror to why they want to influence kids in a negative way. Yep. And that fits in with what I was saying in some way that I forgot. But well,
because you end up hitting why would somebody want to be a wolf? Why would they be after your child or our children? And part of the answer is adults are harder to get. They're not blank slates. They're less wilded. They're more set in their ways. And the other issue is, especially when you start dealing with ideologies or philosophies that someone might follow, you really need to recruit. I mean, just this morning, we were talking about somebody who used to believe in God, and then they decided God didn't exist. We say, okay, well, when did you decide God didn't exist? It was, I started thinking for myself. Okay, well, when did you start thinking for yourself? And the answer was, oh, well, I went to this course and I met this professor, and it's like, okay, wait a minute. You found somebody else to think for you.
Right. You exchange your parents or your preacher or whoever was influencing you before with a new influencer.
Right. And so you said children aren't all a blank slate. And that's true, because the inbornness of conscience just can't be denied. Not saying what is in the conscience, but the inborn state is, I know there's right and wrong. I may not be able to articulate it. I may not know what things are right and wrong, but I know for sure they exist, right? That has to be taught out of you. That has to be actively rejected. And so going after children, because like they've got to be fundamentally changed. They've got to be fundamentally told to think differently than you know is true.
Right. So we've hit on the kinds of things that could be the kinds of places, the kinds of things that wolves want to do with your kids, and why that's appealing. similar reasons as being a mentor. And it's, if you get more people to be like you, then there's this subjective sort of sense of legitimacy. More people are doing the thing that I'm doing, therefore the thing I'm doing must be okay, which is a significant psychological social drive. And if you get kids to like the things you like, do the things you do, think the way that you think, well, you're having an impact on the future, right? And that's very appealing. That's like, that can be sort of part of your legacy, which is great if you're doing good things and is really bad if you're not. So then the question for us as parents is, what are we going to do to defend, to watch out for and defend against the wolves at the door?
The first thing is the same answer as every video.
Right. We need to watch ourselves and make sure that we're properly pursuing virtue and competence the way that we ought to. Understand what it is that we need to be doing with our life. So that, you know, the kinds of things are we brave when we need to be brave? Do we speak up when we need to speak up? Or are we being cowardly some of the times? Are we being wise so that we understand how to value things? We are able to be properly discern things, you know, what to do, who to trust. And trust and faith, those are related to, they're related to a virtue, and knowing who to trust and how you go about that is related to wisdom and virtue. And there are many others. Humility is vastly important. So have we identified what characteristics of virtue we need to pursue? And then secondarily, are we able to sort of articulate that?
Right.
And then share it with our kids. So it's like a process of be virtuous, articulate what that means, and then teach and share and train that in your child.
Right. So in the first case, it's living out a true example of what virtue is, and it's the second is being able to teach that in a coherent way, right? So I've got to be able to teach my children, hey, you know this conscience you were born with, and your knowledge of right and wrong. Well, that actually exists because there actually are things that are right and things that are wrong, and here's what some of those things are, right? And then we can say, now look, people historically have searched out what is a good life. What does a good life look like? And they've consistently come to the same things, and it's patience and quiet and service and humility and honesty. And it has a lot to do with spending time as a family. And so then it's like, all right, a virtuous or good life looks kind of like this. If you're at least vaguely living a life that's consistent with that, well, then you've got an authentic brand for your kid. Not you'll match all the time, because that's not possible. If your life looks wholly different than that, well, then you're a hypocrite, and your kid's going to notice that.
Well, there's this is something that is widely derided. It's kind of a trope with parenting thought, but it is worth noting the idea of, do what I say, not as I do. And that's we bring that up because of hypocrisy. But what you have to remember is, as a parent, you need to clearly in your life be pursuing what is good. You can't eat your cake and have it too, right? I think what a lot of people want to do is they want to engage in a little bit of hedonism. They want to sort of live as they want to live, but then they want their kids to be good and
better.
Do what's right? And okay, that can work when your kid's in grade school to a degree, perhaps. But at some point, teenagers can smell hypocrisy, right?
Sure.
Like they sense it. The appearance, just what looks as if it is hypocritical, is going to create an incredible weakness in your ability to train your kids. So, and also by the time they run into these wolves, if you haven't taught them how to deal with it, taught them when to say no, taught them how to identify these sorts of problems, then it's probably too late to a degree, right? The friend is like, oh, hey, and then they go over, what they want your kid to do, or they offer them up some path that is not the right way to go. They need to have already been warned about that and learned how do you say no to somebody that you really like? How do you risk sacrificing relationships, friendships, in order to pursue what's better? Like, how do you do that? And you as a parent are the one who needs to be training your kids to do it and be an example of it already.
Well, there's a built-in fallacy here that nobody can actually live a righteous or virtuous life. This is some of what we find in our teens that are encouraging other teens to underage drink or use weed or engage in promiscuous sex. It's because nobody can possibly live
perfectly.
Nobody can possibly live perfectly.
Right.
But they immediately switch the fallacy of nobody can even live kind of good or like have a growth or improvement mindset. And so our third point then is like, we have to actually teach our children how to behave and how to think, because if we're not doing that, then somebody else is going to. And that's the ethos of the day. The ethos of the day is actually the fallacy that living a good life isn't possible. And since it's not possible, well, then let's not even bother. Matter of fact, let me bring you down to my level.
Well, and so something you said reminded me of this. This is really, really key. You as a parent have to be a good example. That's not enough. You have to overtly teach and train your kids how to deal with this stuff. If you're a good example alone, or you do good things in quiet and you don't invite your kids to see you doing it or to do it with you, then they aren't going to know that that's something they're supposed to emulate. You need to be the good example so that you're not being hypocritical. And then you need to teach what that means. And obviously, you have to know what that means. And one of the things you were saying, like, you can't be perfect. You can't be free of mistakes. That's not going to happen. But you can pursue virtue and goodness. And that's one of the reasons why I've kind of avoided saying be virtuous. I mean, that's what I'm talking about, but that can make it seem too difficult.
But it's become virtuous.
Well, I say pursue virtue. It's like a hunt, right? You're in the process of hunting after it. And if you see that you make missteps, you have error, then you apologize, you identify, and then you continue the pursuit of virtue. That's what we're trying to advocate for. And that's what we want our kids to do, to become virtuous and competent adults.
Now, the last way that you protect your kids from danger is actively protect and shield them from danger, right? So there's a built-in stereotype here that if we shelter our children at all, then there's going to be a rebellious phase. And they're going to go out seeking all the evils and vices of the world. So if you shelter your child from danger, then they're going to become like a drug-using promiscuous addict. So
May I ask a question about that?
Sure.
Okay. I have a thought about what the answer is, but I want to hear what you have to say. Do you think that's ever true? And if it's ever true, when and why? Like, parents engage in, boundary setting or whatever, and then the result is a bunch of rebellion.
Oh, sure.
If that trope is accurate, when and why is it accurate?
Well, hyper restriction will actually produce this reactive formation, right? So if you don't instruct your children to have knowledge about the world and what's going on, then there's going to be a pretty marked curiosity. So instead, we want to say to children, okay, here's what the dangers of the world are, and here's why you don't want to pursue them.
So then that means that you protect them from like the actual situation of being tempted, but you don't protect them from the knowledge that those situations exist.
That's right. And you actually want to expose your child to just enough danger that you're properly inoculating, so that they're able to recognize what is danger and flee from it. So I'm giving my child more and more opportunity as they grow and develop. So my 8-year-old, he doesn't go anywhere without us, and maybe yours does. But when he's 10, he's going to be walking the neighborhood, and when he's a teenager, he's going to be able to be out by himself, and later, yes, with a car. But are people who are parents who protect to the point that their children's doors are literally locked in the home as a teen by the parents. There's gonna be a rebellion. So
what we're advocating for then is we're saying yes, overprotection exists.
Mm-hmm.
That is true, but it's overstated. And yes, over sheltering exists, but there's a point where we prepare, protect, and shelter. It's in the strike zone.
And it looks like this.
Okay.
It looks like this. Okay, there's this big bad world out there. So I'll build a straw house.
Right.
Well, it's going to blow down. There's this big bad world out there. So I'll build a brick house that I live in. And inside the brick house, I'll build a panic room that my kid lives in, and I slide in their meals under a door or under a slide. And then when the kid's an adult and they leave the house, hey, I heard there were wolves out here. What's going on outside the house?
Right. So I think a couple things strike me. One, we've mentioned before that can create a problem with the overprotection. That's hypocrisy, right? If you're not living it yourself, then that's going to create a major issue.
Yeah.
Another one, actually, I think is a lack of discernment. If your kids pick up on a lack of your being discerning, then they can't trust you. Well, there's a couple ways that come to my mind they'll be able to pick up on this. If you always say no, always say no, you have no discernment because you're just on a program. The program is the no program. You have to be lenient some of the time. If you never let your kids take risks, you have no discernment, right? If you don't risk the possibility of letting them do something a little bit dangerous, then you're probably not risking enough. The trick is choose the amount of danger and prepare them for it. I argue for the philosophy of if you're going to be strict, which you need to be strict about some things, our society is not good at this. You do need to be strict about some things, but if you're going to be strict about some things, you need to be lenient about some things. Make decisions and let your kids have freedom. Then if they're with their friends, and their friends are like, wait, you're not allowed to just watch as much TV as you want, or you're not allowed to watch that movie, or you're not going to get to go do this thing. Well, they better have some things to brag about that. Oh, I get to do this fun thing. My kid, my parents are going to take me out to this, to this water park, and we get a season pass Six Flags, or I didn't get to watch that movie, but I get to watch this R-rated movie because my parents are so cool. You want to be the cool parent about some stuff. So you need to choose what are you going to battle on? Because if you're the uncool parent about everything, then I think that the arguments about overprotection, the kids are going to rebel, those can start to kick in. So you do need to be concerned about that, but it is a trope that is over pushed. It's used as a way to evangelize parents towards let your kids do everything.
Highly permissive.
And that's not good.
And part of this is having an intentional family culture, right? Some of what you're describing is, okay, and then your children won't say, it's not about, oh, I'm allowed to do this or that. It'll be, oh, in my family, we stay up late this night a week and we all watch a movie together. In my family, we go to a water park. So I went to public school, and in public school it was very much, what do you as an individual get to do or not do? And actually in our nuclear families, in the historical model, this is where our first collectivist culture would be, right? So these are the places in which we're more alike than different.
That actually speaks to, we hadn't written this down, I hadn't prepared this, but there's the idea of creating your own family culture and family identity. And that can be protective against wolves, because if your kids like being a part of your family, they like the culture you've created, you have an identity as a family that they're proud of, they're not ashamed of it, then when wolves come along that offer something that's contradictory to that, the kids will voluntarily say, oh, well, I don't want that. That's not part of the identity and the culture that we are in, that we have. Now, you can take that too far. If you pick a culture that's bad, that could be a problem. But having a family culture that is unifying and that people are happy with, and they have an individual identity within that. They're part of that unit and they're excited about it. That could be really protective.
Well, you can actually have your own family ethos, and it can be, and it really should be explicit. Matter of fact,
so you actually state out a motto.
You can have a motto, you can have a virtue list, you can say the values, but you do need to, if you're doing what we're talking about, you do need to state it. So like if you happen to come visit our family and you brought you brought a poem you wanted to read, or you sat with us for like evening story time, you can ask the children, all right, which family virtue is this story about? And you will get an answer.
That's pretty cool. When that idea can start when they're pretty young, when you're having them do chores around the house, or you have rules about how they engage with their siblings. Because Heather, my wife, she's always had like a list of some simple rules on the wall. And it's things like people before things, obey right away. It used to be obey before you play, but obey right away was better.
Yeah.
And like she'll slowly improve on it in time. I'm forgetting what some of the other ones are, but those are alluding to specific virtues, right? Obey right away has to do with diligence, priorities, respecting us, and sacrifice. You do what is challenging now, and then you get the reward and you get to enjoy that later. Putting people before things, that has to do with the virtue of love and sacrifice and kindness. So like those rules that are for little kids, they allude to large moral, moral philosophy concepts.
That's right.
And virtues.
Yeah. And so my bottom line then is, how do we protect our children from wolves at the door? Is we have to make what's inside the house more attractive than opening the door.
Yeah, that speaks to the, if you're too rigid, then the kids rebel thing. You want your kids to be basically happy with what's going on in the home. Now we run into a problem with this in the teenage years, because the kids need to realize they'll be part of the family and they can visit home, but they're going to be leaving home. And so then there is I have to be okay with leaving, right? Like that's the, cut the apron strings kind of a deal, and the kids who are healthy will want to do that, but they'll still have a sense of the family culture, and there'll be a part of that they're taking with them. So there's this launching process, and you want the kids to be ready for independence, and then say no to the wolves at the door when they're leaving and they're creating their own life as a young adult.
Well, I think we'll do perhaps another video on some of these ideas, but this speaks to the benefit even of a family mythos, right? We have the family ethos or the ethical things that bind us, that give us identity. But if you have the family mythos, in fact, then when you've got the child who's preparing to leave home, hopefully they have some ideas about hero's journey, right? Hopefully they have some ideas about launching, and they're thinking about themselves in terms of knighthood or becoming, or in terms of rites of passage.
So there's the story that they're engaging in, and it's a noble story.
There's a noble story, and it's different than the cultural narrative. In our versions that we're talking about, you're a noble, perhaps warrior, and you can go out amongst wolves because wolves can't harm you because you can fight.
Right. If you keep your eyes open. Right.
If you keep your visor up.
Yeah. If you're watching, if you're watchful and you're ready to defend and attack, then yes. And we are arguing, I don't know if we said this explicitly exactly, but we are arguing that there are a lot of societal norms where our society has given in to the wolves. And that is that's part of the reason why universities, there's some things that are commonly taught at universities that young adults are buying into that are part of the wolf analogy. They're a problem, and the kids need to be prepared for that. And that's why we're saying they're everywhere. They're in the entertainment, they're in the social media, they're the friends, they're at the schools.
That is basically going to do it for me, Ronnie. Do you want to bring us home?
That's it. Just keep watching our videos. Thank you. Hi, I'm Ronnie West.
And I'm Jeremy, or Dr. J.
This is Good Parents, Good Children.
Parent better so you can judge your friends.